Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Kyle Bertin. He is the co-founder of 2 Boxes, and 2 Boxes is helping to solve some returns challenges, specifically for 3PLs and shippers and those processing returns, and making it a little more simplified, streamlined, easier, and overall just a better experience for what's typically, I would say, personally, one of the ugliest parts of an operation is the returns department, from my experience. So we're going to hear a little bit more about the returns problem that's out there and how Kyle and 2 Boxes is going to solve that and is fixing that for some operations already, and more to come in the future, I'm sure. So Kyle, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing well, Kevin. Thanks for having me. It's one of those long-time listener, first-time, guest situations. So really happy to be on.
Definitely happy to get you on, and definitely have been very interested in learning about what you're doing at 2 Box over the past couple months here, I think, as we've been connected, definitely. So tell us a little bit about your background. You're the co-founder here at 2 Boxes. So I'm curious about your background and kind of how that led to the founding of 2 Boxes.
Yeah. So, I say this a lot whenever I meet, potential customers and partners, is I did not start in supply chain and logistics. I fell into it.
Most people don't.
And kind of quickly fell in love with it. So, my background is actually in finance and management consulting. And then a little over a decade ago, I was recruited to join a publicly traded mining company. I thought I was going to be working on mostly corporate strategy and mergers and acquisitions, and I ended up getting very involved in the build out of their logistics business.
Interesting.
And so that was sort of my initial, where I caught the bug of finding out that supply chain was really fun. There were a lot of really complex problems to solve, and I think just some great people in the industry. And the other thing that really, sort of impressed on me during that experience was there just really wasn't a lot of technology available to help, folks like us who are trying to solve, pretty large problems. And so, I learned a lot during that experience. And back in 2016, I made the decision actually to go to graduate school to try to pivot sort of, into supply chain technology. So I ended up going to get my business degree, and through that, just kind of networking my way into actually Flexport. And so that was sort of my first big supply chain technology experience. I went to work at Flexport and was leading inside of their ocean business, their global business operations team, and was serving as the chief of staff to the head of that business, which was, just a huge opportunity for me, kind of probably way above my pay grade at that point, just a big, fast growing company. And that's sort of how I started learning a lot more about e-commerce logistics. I started my logistics career more on the unsexy shipper, side of things, like bulk logistics and things that didn't really interact with consumers directly. I started learning a lot about e-commerce logistics at Flexport. And then I actually was recruited away from Flexport to join a company in Colorado where I now live that's called Outrider. And Outrider builds autonomous vehicles for automated yard operations.
Yeah,
really
we've
cool.
had them on the podcast. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had Andrew on or who you had on.
Yeah, it was Andrew. Yeah.
Andrew, yeah. So great guy, great business. And I was leading the strategy and planning team there. And started getting just really interested in the returns problem. And kept seeing across Flexport and Outrider that every time I went into a fulfillment center that had, a high volume of, apparel, footwear, accessories, kind of common consumer goods, that there was usually a section of the warehouse that looked pretty nasty, to say the least. And every time I asked about it, it was returns. So that's kind of the genesis of the idea. I've always wanted to be a founder, have known that for a long time, knew that it was going to be in supply chain logistics, and just was looking for a problem that I thought needed to be solved and that we might have a unique perspective on. And met my co-founder. We got really curious about returns, and one thing led to another. And now we're about 2 years in and have a team of 10 and have raised some money and have a lot of customers. And it's been a fun journey, to say the least.
Nice. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially, getting that experience that you're not traditionally, like you said, from the supply chain space, and then getting that experience and falling in love with it, and really looking for a part of the supply chain where there's a lot of pain, which I'm sure you find a lot of pain in returns. I've managed a couple of returns departments in my career. So not as you said, not the prettiest or, sometimes nasty things you're dealing with there, because you never going to have a lot of unexpected, I guess you could say, in the way of what's coming into you from a consumer, or, what it looks like, and all those different types of things. So tell us a little bit too. I'm curious, like the name 2 Boxes, like where does that come from?
Yeah. So, it's actually our second name. We started with a different name.
That was the first name?
Not very good.
1 Box? Or?
Yeah. Right. So actually, funny enough, the first business idea we had was also in logistics, but not in the return space. Kind of tangentially related, but we won't bore you with the details. But we called that business Hurry Up, and so we were Hurry Up for the first, I think, like 6 to 9 months of the business, and then we actually, went through a sort of rebrand and renaming exercise, and we narrowed it down to a bunch of different names that we were excited about. And 2 Boxes really is the one that won out. And really the meaning behind the name is sort of kind of a play on just returns being, sort of packages that have moved in 2 directions. The second being that usually returns are processed inside of large fulfillment centers, right? And so it's a small box within a big box, so 2 boxes. And then last but certainly not least, a lot of people, especially consumers, are not aware of this, but returns are kind of an environmental nightmare. And not kind of, they very much are an environmental nightmare. And, we want to build a business that drives a lot of value for our customers and obviously, earns a lot of revenue, but we also want to build a business that has an impact on, the sort of downsides of this space, primarily a lot of the waste that we see in the returns process. And so we're really hoping through this to check 2 boxes, right? To build a business that does well, but also does good.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I love too that you're recognizing that focus on the kind of the sustainability, environmental impact that returns has too. And it is such, like you said, I think people don't really recognize that or realize that, but like even just, double transportation essentially is, tons of, carbon emissions there, and, then additional packaging and all these kind of things. I mean, and, what happens to the goods essentially that get returned at some point too, it certainly has an impact as well. So it's great that you guys are recognizing that. So we kind of been talking about the story of 2 Boxes and how the 2 Boxes kind of came to be and grew up from, 1 box to 2 box and all those types of things, right? So, but tell us actually what does 2 Boxes do? We know you focused on returns, but tell us like specifically what do you do for the returns area? Yeah,
so we said that our mission is to turn returns into an asset instead of a liability. And that, to put it pretty succinctly, we really focus on supercharging returns operations inside of the warehouse.
Okay.
So yeah, what we've seen is that there's been no shortage of returns innovation, and that really a lot of that innovation is focused today on the merchant and the end consumer, right? So companies like Loop and Happy Returns and Narvar and many more in that space have made it easier for consumers to initiate returns, create exchanges, drop off returns, and then for brands essentially to coordinate the process of getting the merchandise from the end consumer into the warehouse, whether they're operating their own warehouse or more often than not relying on a 3PL to do their fulfillment, but commonly today also take in their returns, right, and process those. And so those companies really, their innovation kind of stops at the warehouse door, and they don't by and large do much of anything to help the 3PL with the physical process of receiving, prioritizing, inspecting, and dispositioning all these returns, right? And commonly, the warehouse management system obviously is sort of the lifeblood of most 3PL, locations. And so warehouse management systems, I would say, are very good at what I like to call just, pallet in and parcel out, right? So very good at coordinating those things. But in general, returns processes inside of warehouse management systems are very immature, if they even are offered. So the RMA providers, by and large, are not helping the 3PL, and the warehouse management system helps the 3PL, but doesn't really do much for the return process. Right. So what we've tended to see is that if you go into a high volume fulfillment center that's processing or receiving a lot of returns for, high return rate goods, especially in apparel, accessories, footwear, consumer electronics, so on and so forth, that most return inspection and disposition processes are actually very offline and manual. You'll have teams of people, depending on the warehouse side. You might have one dedicated returns person. You might have a team of 50, right? And those folks are typically trained on very offline and manual returns SOPs, right? Of, hey, here's the standard operating procedure for, our footwear client, our apparel client, sort of 1 through 100, right? And because those brands tend to work with many different technology providers, right? Some of them might run on Loop returns, some of them might run on Happy Returns, some of them might not use an RMA provider at all. You have also just very different sort of processes for data input and output, right? You might have teams logging into those different providers, kind of admin portals. And so all of that to say, what we tend to see in the returns process is that returns are very often a very bespoke process, right? Where there's a lot of tacit knowledge. It might be that one person in the whole warehouse knows how to do returns for brand A, right? And that this becomes a huge problem because of warehouse turnover, right? You might have return sections turning over every 4 to 5 to 6 months. And that especially during peak season, you're usually bringing in a lot of temporary labor to process returns. Yeah. And so it becomes sort of a nightmare to manage all of this. And so that's where we come in. And we build software that, in general, we call it enables a system of record for return processing inside of the warehouse. So think 2 boxes becomes the de facto system for any person in that warehouse to process any return from any brand. So we hook into the front end of that return process to the Loops and the Happy Returns of the world. Yeah. And we also then have spent a lot of time creating technology that essentially enables us to create and maintain and improve returns SOPs in software. So think, instead of Kevin being trained on how I process returns for 1, 2, maybe if you're really good, 3 brands, any person in that warehouse can scan a tracking number on a parcel when it comes back, and then can just be walked through that whole flow to make sure that they reconcile the inventory and that they know how to process the inventory that is in that package. And then really importantly for the 3PL, we actually track everything that's happening in that process, right? And this has become really beneficial for our customers because we see very commonly that if you go to a warehouse, manager, right, somebody who's running day-to-day operations in the facility, and you ask them sort of a core set of outbound focused KPIs, they have them readily accessible in their WMS or in another sort of data system. But if you ask them about the return section, you get a lot of blank stares about what's really happening. Right? Yeah. And so that's where we sort of benefit the warehouse operator, but then over time, we're actually really helping benefit their merchants as well, of visibility into the process, root cause of why certain returns were not returned to stock and what the merchant or the 3PL can do about it, right? Maybe it's could be that the answer is instituting a new value-added service program. It could be that the answer is, cracking down on a set of customers who are committing fraud. It could, so on and so forth. So that's what we really do today. And there's a lot of different applications that we hear from our customers of, enabling billing, enabling sort of pricing and more coordination of value-added services, because with our software, we can actually make those processes very scalable.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great thing. And it's great to fill kind of that gap because, like you said, I mean, it is kind of, you put temporary employees in there and all these things, but traditionally, I mean, it's a pretty tribal knowledge almost kind of department and situation there. I mean, you have a lot of nuances and things that need to be looked for and, items that need to be inspected in a certain way and, to be able to be deemed whether they're good or not. And, if you get somebody in there that's temporary, that doesn't necessarily care as much, right? I mean, you may have some things that shouldn't pass, kind of going in the good bin versus some things that maybe could go in the good bin,
100%.
just kind of going in the bad bin, right? So it's kind of both sides. I mean, you want to be able to utilize that type of labor to be able to kind of maximize and on your costs and things like that. But at the same time, it's like you need to have someone that's like highly trained or highly skilled to be able to handle that returns department really kind of effectively, in my experience. So being able to bring a system in that's going to allow you to do that type of thing makes a lot of sense. And it's such a big jump, I think, for that area of the operation, and it just makes sense overall. So, I mean, tell us, some of the customers that you guys have brought on. I mean, what are some of like their big pain points that they came to you with in the returns area? Like, I mean, where were they really kind of struggling in the returns area and saying like, hey, like we need something to kind of tackle this problem we're having?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, so great question. So we're currently live with 5 different 3PLs, and across many of our customers are actually live in multiple facilities right now. And we're going to be onboarding, probably going to be doubling that logo count by the end of the year, just based on current projections, and hopefully going to exceed that. And I'd say a lot of the problems that we hear from our customers are just ones that we've observed when we were, kind of building the product, and then will be probably pretty consistent with a lot of your audience who focus in this area, right? Yeah. Which is, I'd say, kind of just breaks down from the beginning of this process to the end of this process. It's things like receiving and prioritization. Right? Some of our 3PL customers might receive 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 units of returns in a given day. Right. Yeah. And that's just an incredible strain on their resources. Right. And on the flip side of that, some of those, I like to say not every return is created equal. Right? There are some returns in there that are really important to the brand. It's a SKU that's low in supply, and it's really important to get it back to stock. Seeing other ones are returns that are very likely damaged or are just, very, deep in supply, and the brand, the incremental unit doesn't really benefit the brand that much. And so we've actually been rolling out new technology that enables us to essentially triage returns upon receipt, so that a 3PL can put their labor on the returns that are going to be most impactful to their merchants. So I think that's sort of, big problem number one. Big problem number two is creating and maintaining returns SOPs. Right? Yeah. Some people that listen to this are probably going to poke at this, but, just as a thought experiment, right? Fulfillment has a lot of challenges, don't get me wrong. But on the fulfillment side, pick, packing, and shipping any order for any customer is, I'd say, a lot less complex than a return, right? Because It's all standardized quality. It's all standardized packaging. You follow your WMS, you pick, pack, and ship it. And, by and large, that's a process that's kind of well understood and well implemented today with technology. Yeah. On the return side, how do I create and maintain an SOP for a dozen, 2 dozen, 100 different brands inside my facility? That's a big pain point today. It's something we see consistently where you essentially have 3PL employees and brand employees just collaborating every month, every quarter on an updated returns SOP. And it's really hard, even if you could create an SOP, to enforce it, right? Because, you have employees who are, being faced with, as I mentioned, thousands of units of returns per day for all these different brands. Even if you can put it into a Word document or a PDF document, it's just hard to enforce that quality across a large and constantly changing labor base. And so that's where I think we've been able to solve a ton of problems of creating those SOPs and serving them in software in a way that's very intelligent and very, easily understood to that frontline worker of, okay, cool. I don't need to be trained on the 20-page document. I just follow the workflow in 2 boxes. And then I think third, it's really the visibility from this, right? It's one of the most fun parts of my job right now is hearing from 3PLs all the different use cases for the data that we are able to capture in this process, right? Mm-hmm. Of just general things like how many units per hour are going through my software, going through my returns process right now because of 2 boxes. What's performance at a individual team member level, at an aggregate brand level, right? Like, hey, does brand A take me twice as long as brand B because it's a much more complex inspection process, right? Maybe I need to be charging for that, right? Yeah. So that sort of visibility, and then also the ability to actually track and capture revenue. This is a huge thing that we've heard from 3PLs recently of, hey, even if I wanted to do this, I have no scalable way to track all the returns work that I did, right? Think of how many units did I receive? How many did I rebag or retag or lint roll or all these other value-added services that the brand might ask for that the 3PL, all things being equal, is very happy to do, but not if they can't systematically track it and bill for it. And so that's something that I think has been, really beneficial here. And then I think the third that's been kind of surprising, but really cool to see is a lot of 3PLs who've come to us and said, hey, like we have, categorically avoided fulfillment for certain types of products because we didn't want to deal with the returns. And that means that they've bowed out of, landing very lucrative fulfillment and, and transportation revenue, accounts because they didn't want to deal with the returns. And, have a lot of our customers now coming to us saying like, hey, in the sales process, we're actually leaning into this and we're talking about our capabilities because of 2 boxes. And we're able to go after some of this more lucrative business because we're now confident that we, won't lose all the revenue and margin that we're gaining, in the returns process.
Very interesting. And I think it's so great to see like, that it's changing the perspective on returns a little bit for some of these 3PLs. It sounds like, it's changing their idea of, is it, traditionally like 3PLs, like it's going to be like the last example you just gave, like it's going to be such a headache dealing with their returns. Like we're not equipped to do that. We don't want to do that. So we're going to turn down the fulfillment side of the business too, and lose out on potentially, like a big customer, a big client. And I think it's great that you're now taking that and not only, adding that value on the return side, making it easier for them, but then in turn, it's allowing them to open up for more opportunities to business as well, which I think is a great thing. So, I mean, along those lines too, I mean, you mentioned earlier kind of you're saying you're making returns an asset for the 3PL. So tell us kind of a little bit, what do you mean exactly by that and how that's been working out for these customers you have?
Yeah, great question. So I'd say first and foremost, it's efficiency. So, the numbers vary across our customer base at this point, but I'd say in general, we have seen the ability for 2 boxes to improve the efficiency as measured on units per hour through the return section by 40 to 50% sort of baseline. And for some of our customers, we're increasing rates by 2x or more, right? Of somebody who used to do 20 units of returns per hour through the returns process, now operating at 40, 50, 60 units per hour. And just from a unit economics basis, right? Because most 3PLs are actually pricing and selling returns on a transactional basis, right? Of, hey, it's X dollars per return or per unit, that when you're able to increase efficiency that much, returns actually become an asset pretty quickly, right? Because, you're able to process way more returns across the same, fixed labor and square footage. And that enables this to be actually a very high margin business. I'd say, additionally, we're seeing that 2 Boxes has become really an asset for the employee base. One of the things, when we started this company, actually, I personally processed thousands of units of returns by hand in various 3PL warehouses to learn. And through that journey, I met a lot of great people, everybody from kind of frontline returns associates to people managing return sections to facility managers. And we heard a lot about the pain points of how returns impact the labor pool and just how hard it is to maintain good return staff, because it's just kind of a thankless job with very limited tools. And that also there was a lot of non-value added work that was happening in the return stream. So think like actually entering information into Google Sheets and other non-scalable ways to actually capture this information so that 3PLs could bill for it, right? And so, the returns associates are sitting there with Google Sheets and PDF documents, whereas the people who are doing pick pack are walking around with handhelds and intelligent WMS systems, right? And like, oh my gosh, this is a terrible job. Why am I doing that? And so, that's, I think we've seen that 2 Boxes actually become an asset for labor, right? Of making them faster, capturing information instead of them having to manually enter it, just really making their job more enjoyable and just less stressful. And so I think that's been an asset. And then the third is an asset to your brands, right? I mean, if you're 3PL, right, at the end of the day, you're serving your merchants. And, a lot of merchants now in these high growth sectors, especially, e-commerce heavy merchants, have 20, 30, 40% return rates. And I think there's been a huge shift, especially since we started the company, of brands, kind of used to look at returns of, oh, it's just the cost of doing business. And, it's not that big of a deal if my 3PL is not very good at processing my returns. And they didn't put a lot of pressure on the 3PL. What we've really seen in the last 12 months, particularly the last 6 months, there's been a huge, I think, shift in brand mentality of
interesting.
No, returns are actually a huge cost center that they need to figure out, because when you have, inflationary impacts on their business in the form of higher costs of capital for, borrowing money to finance new inventory. And when you have, sort of a unclear impact on consumer demand about how that's going to change. And actually, we've seen that a lot of brands have more returns coming in this environment, that a lot of brands are starting to rethink a lot of things that they used to sort of, be gospel in the return, process of, hey, everybody gets a free return. Hey, we don't care about, if our 3PL takes 2-3 weeks to process a return on average. Hey, we don't really care about data from the return section. Now we've seen brands go to 3PLs and asking for more and more and more in the return process that the 3PL can't deliver. But with 2 Boxes, we're able to essentially enable a lot of that visibility and that high touch, treatment that brands are asking from 3PLs in a way that's actually scalable. And so I actually think it becomes a huge asset for the 3PL from a sales and a competitive differentiation perspective, right? Because, we're now in a world where last year, 20% of total purchases in the US were returned. And, if you're a 3PL who's, very good at pick, pack, ship, like lots of 3PLs out there, I think you increasingly have to be good at inbounds and receiving and processing returns. And, that's where I think we're positioning ourselves as an asset for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you get good at like you said, the pick and pack and that type of thing. And, when you start to increase your level of efficiency and just overall proficiency of those kind of surrounding tasks too, like the inbound, you mentioned the returns as well, then, it starts to become a competitive advantage for you too, with like brands as well, when you're able to say like, we process this many returns units in an hour and things like that. I mean, you start to like kind of attract them and in that regard as it becomes more important to them as well. So I think it's really, really interesting what you guys have been able to create, and always love a good SOP, especially one that's been digitized. So that makes me a little bit of a nerd, I'm sure, to say that out loud, but but I think it's a really great thing that you're able to do that, and also, make at the end of the day, make the actual workers experience better too within that department, and being able to kind of improve everything overall from the whole returns perspective, whether it's for the brand, whether it's for the end consumer, whether it's for the worker or the operation overall as a whole. I think think it's a really great thing that you guys are doing with this 2 boxes. So Kyle, I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking to me about 2 boxes and telling us a little bit about the problem out there with returns and how you guys are solving it. If people are interested in learning more about 2 boxes or maybe getting it for themselves, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest thing is to go to our website. It's www.twoboxes.com. That's TWOboxes.com. There's a contact link there. You can drop us a note. You can also check us out on LinkedIn. And if you ever want to reach me, actually, I'm Kyle at twoboxes.com. I always love meeting 3PLs. I get a lot of spam, but that's okay. Sometimes I get a lot of great 3PLs in there. So always happy to have people contact me. And I know, a lot of 3PLs can, I think, be a little bit hesitant about adopting new technology. We're also always happy to put potential 3PLs in touch with some of our existing customer base who are using and loving the product and talking about, what we're doing for them, right? I can tell you all about the great things that we do for our customers, but I think more often than not, it's great to hear it from an actual customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So Kyle, thank you very much again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.